The American Revolution is often remembered as a fight for liberty, a dramatic struggle between colonists and the British Crown for the birth of a new nation. But that's only part of the story. Beneath the surface, another war was being waged, one that is rarely told in textbooks or celebrated in patriotic songs. Beyond the famous battles and declarations, a lesser-known war raged on the vast and untamed frontier, one that would shape the destiny of the continent for generations to come. While patriots fought for their own freedom from British rule, the Continental Army launched a campaign of destruction against Native American communities, especially those of the Iroquois Confederacy. This was not accidental. It was a calculated and systematic effort to break the power of the Iroquois by targeting their homes, their food supplies, and their very way of life. Entire villages were burned, crops destroyed, and families forced to flee into the wilderness. The devastation left deep scars, not just on the land, but on the people who called it home. For many Native Americans, the revolution brought not freedom, but loss and upheaval. Most histories focus on colonists versus the British, with Native Americans as mere background figures, their stories often overlooked or simplified. But for the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, the revolution was a civil war that tore their confederacy apart, pitting brother against brother and village against village. The Oneida and Tuscarora chose to side with the Americans, hoping that alliance would secure their future and protect their people. Meanwhile, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Seneca allied with the British, believing that partnership offered the best hope of defending their ancestral lands from encroachment. This division set the stage for a devastating conflict on the New York frontier, where neighbors became enemies and ancient alliances were shattered. The war for independence was also a war of conquest, and its methods were brutal. Villages razed, families scattered, and a way of life forever changed. To truly understand America's founding, we must confront this darker chapter, a story of struggle, survival, and the high cost of revolution for those caught in its path. As the main war stalled in the east, with armies locked in a tense stalemate near the great cities, a different kind of conflict was igniting far from the headlines and the eyes of the world. The American frontier, stretching across dense forests and rugged hills, erupted in violence and chaos. Loyalist militias, often joined by their Iroquois allies, launched a campaign of terror against American settlements. Their raids were swift and brutal, designed to instill fear, destroy crops, and force settlers to abandon their homes. These attacks were not just about military gain, they were meant to disrupt food supplies, shatter morale, and draw precious resources away from the main conflict in the east. The infamous Wyoming Valley and Cherry Valley massacres sent shockwaves through the colonies. News of burning homes, devastated families, and slain civilians spread quickly, fueling outrage and a deep sense of vulnerability among the colonists. These relentless attacks threatened to collapse the fragile hold Americans had on the western frontier, and even risked starving the Continental Army by destroying vital food sources. The farms of New York and Pennsylvania, with their golden fields and hard-working families, were the breadbasket for Washington's troops. Without them, the Army's survival was in jeopardy. The war on the frontier became a direct and personal threat to the American cause. Settlers fled in terror, leaving behind everything they had built, and a growing refugee crisis strained the already limited resources of the young nation. George Washington faced an agonizing dilemma. His army was stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts, but the desperate cries for help from the frontier grew louder with each passing day. State governments demanded immediate action, and morale among both soldiers and civilians was plummeting as fear and uncertainty spread. Washington knew that a decisive response was needed. The fate of the revolution itself might depend on it. The war on the frontier would require a new, more ruthless strategy, one that could match the ferocity of the enemy and restore hope to the battered settlements. The fate of the revolution and the future of the American frontier now hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of disaster or triumph. The stage was set for a campaign unlike any other, one that would test the resolve of a nation and determine the destiny of its wild, untamed borderlands. Under mounting pressure, Washington made a fateful decision. Defense was not enough. He ordered Major General John Sullivan to take the war to the Iroquois heartland, not just to fight, but to destroy. The mission erase Iroquois towns, fields, and food stores, crippling their ability to support raids. Washington's orders were explicit: total devastation, capture of prisoners, and destruction so complete the Iroquois would depend on the British to survive. This was a radical departure from the norms of war, targeting civilian infrastructure to break an entire society. Washington saw it as a grim necessity to secure the frontier and preserve the revolution. The governors of New York and Pennsylvania demanded a decisive blow. For Washington, the survival of the new nation justified this harsh measure. The campaign would test the limits of revolutionary ideals. In the summer of 1779, nearly 5,000 Continental soldiers marched into Iroquois territory. This was not just another military expedition, it was a campaign designed to break the power of the Iroquois Confederacy, who had allied with the British and posed a significant threat to the American frontier. The soldiers, led by Generals John Sullivan and James Clinton, advanced with a clear and devastating mission. Sullivan's and Clinton's forces converged, overwhelming the outnumbered Iroquois and their British allies. The American troops moved with determination, their numbers and firepower leaving little hope for resistance. After a brief but fierce battle at Newtown, the Americans began their grim work. The fighting was shortly called but what followed would have far greater consequences. Village after village was burned, longhouses, orchards, and food stores all destroyed. The flames consumed not only homes but the very heart of Iroquois life and culture. The Iroquois, skilled farmers who had cultivated the land for generations, lost entire harvests and generations-old orchards. Their ability to feed their people was wiped out in a matter of weeks. Soldiers spent weeks cutting down corn, uprooting vegetables, and burning hidden food caches. No effort was spared to ensure that nothing edible would remain behind. The goal was clear: ensure there would be nothing left to eat when winter came. The destruction was systematic, leaving the land barren and the people desperate. By fall, over 40 Iroquois towns were wiped out and more than 160,000 bushels of corn destroyed. The scale of devastation was unprecedented in the region's history. Thousands were left homeless and destitute, fleeing to British forts for survival. Families carried what little they could, facing hunger, disease, and the bitter cold ahead. The campaign caused few combat deaths, but set the stage for a humanitarian disaster. Starvation and exposure would claim many more lives than the battlefield ever did. The region was permanently transformed. Once thriving communities became empty ruins, and the scars of destruction would last for generations. The power of the Iroquois Confederacy was shattered. Their unity and influence, built over centuries, were broken in a single campaign. The cost was measured in suffering, not just in battle. For the Iroquois, the campaign brought loss, hunger, and the destruction of a way of life that could never be fully restored. The Sullivan-Clinton Expedition marked a turning point in American warfare. Unlike previous raids, this was a systematic campaign targeting the entire fabric of Iroquois society. The aim was not to defeat warriors, but to destroy homes, crops, and the means of survival. Hunger and homelessness became weapons. Washington and his generals saw the Iroquois as an existential threat, justifying collective punishment. The campaign blurred the line between combatants and civilians, setting a dangerous precedent. The logic: destroy a people's ability to live, and you destroy their ability to resist. This ruthless strategy would echo through future American conflicts. The ideals of liberty were compromised by the realities of war. As the Americans withdrew, thousands of Iroquois returned to ruins. With winter approaching, starvation and exposure claimed many lives. Survivors fled to British forts, dependent on their former allies for food and shelter. The Iroquois Confederacy's autonomy was broken in a single season. When the war ended, the British abandoned their Iroquois allies, ceding their land to the United States. The Iroquois were left dispossessed, forced to negotiate with those who had destroyed their homes. The trauma was lasting. The destruction of towns and loss of land severed ties to centuries of tradition. The campaign was remembered as an act of genocide. Washington became known as the Town Destroyer. The memory of this devastation shaped Iroquois history and their relationship with the United States for generations. The Sullivan-Clinton Expedition set a precedent for American expansion. The strategy of targeting civilian infrastructure to force indigenous peoples from their land became standard policy. This approach was repeated against native nations across the continent for the next century. The narrative of defensive violence justified conquest and dispossession. The destruction of Iroquois towns was used to rationalize further violence and westward expansion. Understanding this campaign reveals that conquest was woven into the nation's founding. The war against the Iroquois was not an anomaly, it was a blueprint for empire. The legacy of this strategy would shape America's future. The decision to destroy the Iroquois homeland was not made lightly. Washington and Congress believed it was necessary for survival, facing defeat and starvation. They chose to sacrifice one people's well-being for another's security. This was not simple villainy, but a complex, morally fraught choice. The campaign exposes the contradiction of fighting for liberty while denying it to others. It forces us to ask, do the ends justify the means? The revolution was both a struggle for freedom and a brutal contest for land. Understanding this complexity is essential for an honest view of American history. The story of the Sullivan-Clinton Expedition challenges the myths of the Revolution. To understand America's origins, we must confront the costs of freedom for some and devastation for others. History is not just heroism and ideals, it's also hard choices and moral compromises. The destruction of the Iroquois homeland shaped the nation as much as any battlefield victory. Remembering this story is not about blame, but about seeking truth. Honest history teaches humility and reminds us of the human cost of conflict. The decision to launch the expedition secured a frontier but devastated a people. Examining these moments enriches our understanding of the nation's story. Patriotism means facing the darker chapters, learning from them, and striving for a more just future. The American story is complicated, and that's what makes it real.